Most engines do not die on the highway, they do not die under heavy load, at high RPM, or during the hardest miles you ever put on them. They die in the first 30 seconds of every single morning, before the oil has reached the valve train, before the coolant has begun circulating, before the metal surfaces expanding under rising heat have found their operating clearances. In those first 30 seconds, your engine is running on residual oil film, metal against metal, at clearances tighter than the engineer who designed it ever intended for sustained operation. And what you do in those 30 seconds, every morning, every cold start, for the entire life of your vehicle, determines whether that engine reaches 100,000 miles or 400,000 miles more than any other single variable in your ownership experience. Japanese mechanics have known this for 50 years. It is taught in Japanese vocational programs as foundational engine theory. It is practiced without exception by every high-mileage fleet operator I have ever documented across Osaka, Nagoya, and Tokyo. And it costs nothing, not a product, not a service, not an appointment. 5 habits, all free, all executable in your own driveway before you leave for work tomorrow morning. And not one of them appears in the owner's manual that came with your car. 2 years ago, I spent 4 months embedded with a Japanese fleet operator running 28 vehicles across Greater Nagoya. His oldest active vehicle had 740,000 kilometers on the original engine block. No rebuild, no cylinder head replacement, no major mechanical intervention of any kind, just continuous daily operation across nearly 2 decades. I went through his driver training documentation, his cold start protocols, his operational records going back to 2005. What I found was not complicated. It was not expensive. It was 5 habits, executed identically across every vehicle in his fleet every morning without exception. Today I am going to show you all 5 in order, from least to most important. And I am warning you now, the last one is the habit that Japanese engine specialists consider the single greatest determinant of long-term engine survival. The one that separates a 100,000-mile engine from a 400,000-mile engine more reliably than any mechanical specification. Stay until the end, because habit number 1 will permanently change how you think about the moment your key turns. If you have made it this far, you already understand something that 99% of drivers never consider. Subscribe and share this with someone who is still turning the key and immediately pulling out of the driveway. Hit the bell because what I am about to show you is the knowledge that Japanese fleet operators build entire driver training programs around, and that Western dealerships have never had any financial incentive to teach you. But stay here because habit number 1 alone has saved more engines from catastrophic early wear than any scheduled maintenance procedure I have ever documented. Habit number 5. Never touch the accelerator during the first 10 seconds of a cold start. This habit sounds obvious. It is not practiced. Watch any parking lot on any cold morning in any Western city. The engine starts, and within 3 seconds the driver has pressed the accelerator, either to rev the engine deliberately in the mistaken belief that this warms it faster, or unconsciously while shifting into gear and beginning to move. Both actions are catastrophically wrong at cold start for the same mechanical reason. At the moment of a cold start, your engine's oil has been sitting in the oil pan for hours. The oil galleries throughout the engine block, the cylinder head, the valve train, are empty. The oil pump requires between 3 and 8 seconds from initial start to build sufficient pressure to push oil through every gallery to every bearing surface. During those seconds, every bearing journal in your engine, your main bearings, your rod bearings, your camshaft bearings, is running on nothing but the residual film left from the last time the engine ran. That film is measured in microns. It is not a lubrication system. It is a delay mechanism, a buffer that buys your oil pump 5 seconds to do its job before metal meets metal without protection. Any throttle input during that window accelerates the engine before the oil system has completed pressure buildup. The bearing surfaces that were already operating at their vulnerability threshold are now operating faster, under greater load, with the same inadequate residual film. Japanese fleet protocol is absolute on this point. After cold start ignition, hands off the throttle, feet off the pedals, complete stillness for a minimum of 10 seconds. The engine idles, the oil pump builds pressure, the galleries fill, the bearings receive protection. Then and only then does any driver input occur. The fleet operator in Nagoya has this written into his driver protocol as a non-negotiable termination offense. 2 documented violations and the driver is removed from the fleet. That is how seriously Japanese high-mileage operators treat 10 seconds of stillness. Habit number 4. Cold idle duration matched to ambient temperature. Western driving culture treats the warm-up idle as either completely unnecessary or as a fixed 30-second procedure executed identically regardless of conditions. Both approaches are wrong, and the mechanical cost of getting this wrong accumulates every single morning across the entire life of the engine. Here is the physics. Engine operating clearances, the microscopic gaps between pistons and cylinder walls, between bearing journals and their housings, between valve stems and guides, are calibrated to precise measurements at operating temperature. At cold temperatures, every metal component in your engine has contracted. Clearances are tighter than design specification. Oil viscosity is higher than design specification. The entire system is operating outside the parameters it was engineered for. Moving a cold engine under load before it has reached minimum operating temperature is the mechanical equivalent of running a sprint immediately after waking from sleep. Every joint, every surface, every clearance is wrong for the demand being placed on it. The Japanese cold idle protocol is temperature scaled. Above 15 degrees Celsius, a 45-second idle before any movement is sufficient. Between 5 and 15 degrees Celsius, the minimum idle extends to 90 seconds. Below 5 degrees Celsius, 2 full minutes of stationary idle before the vehicle moves. Below minus 10 degrees Celsius, 3 minutes minimum, with the first kilometer driven at under 30 kilometers per hour, regardless of traffic conditions. These are not arbitrary numbers. They are derived from thermal expansion rate data for the aluminum and steel alloys used in Japanese engine manufacturing and documented in the Jerry thermal cycling studies of 1989. Studies that informed Japanese domestic market driving education for the following 3 decades. The fleet operator in Nagoya has ambient temperature gauges in every vehicle. Drivers log the morning temperature and the corresponding idle duration on every cold start. It is considered as essential as logging the mileage. Habit number 3. No load for the first 3 kilometers. Your engine reaches full operating temperature at approximately 80 to 90 degrees Celsius coolant temperature. On a typical morning, that temperature is not reached until 5 to 8 kilometers of driving under normal conditions. In the gap between cold start and full operating temperature, your engine is running in a state where thermal expansion is incomplete, oil viscosity is still elevated above optimal, and combustion chamber temperatures have not yet stabilized to the values the fuel injection mapping was calibrated for. Running under significant load in this window, hard acceleration, motorway entry speeds, steep inclines, towing, produces combustion events at temperatures and pressures that the cold engine's components are not yet dimensionally prepared to handle. Piston rings that have not yet reached operating clearance absorb combustion pressure asymmetrically. Cylinder walls that are still contracting transfer heat unevenly. The result is accelerated ring wear, carbon deposit formation on cold valve surfaces, and thermal stress cycling in the cylinder head that shortens head gasket life measurably over years of repeated exposure. Japanese fleet protocol limits engine load to below 30% of maximum output for the first 3 kilometers after cold start, regardless of road conditions. In practical driving terms, this means gentle acceleration, no more than 2,500 RPM, no motorway entries, no aggressive passing maneuvers, no full throttle events of any kind. The engine is treated as a system still achieving its operating state, not as a machine already at full capability. The fleet operator in Nagoya routes his vehicles specifically to allow a 3-kilometer low-load warm-up segment before any demanding road section. This routing is built into the daily schedule. It is not optional. Habit number 2. Electrical load management at cold start. This habit is invisible to most Western drivers because it involves nothing they can see or feel. And it is destroying cold start engine life in virtually every vehicle on Western roads every single morning. Here is what happens the moment you start a cold engine and immediately activate your heated seats, rear window defroster, maximum climate control fan, and connect a phone charger. Your alternator, which is mechanically driven by the engine via the serpentine belt, is suddenly required to generate between 80 and 140 amperes of electrical current to supply those loads. Generating that current requires mechanical work. Work that the engine must perform. Work that is added to the engine's operating load at the exact moment when the oil system is still completing pressure buildup, when bearing surfaces are at their most vulnerable, when every additional load is being absorbed by components that are not yet at operational specification. The alternator load at maximum electrical demand can add the equivalent of 8 to 12 horsepower of parasitic load to a cold engine. On a 1.5-liter 4-cylinder producing perhaps 35 horsepower at cold idle, that represents 25 to 35% of total available output consumed by electrical demand before the oil has finished reaching the camshaft bearings. Japanese fleet protocol staggers electrical load activation after cold start. Engine starts. 30 seconds of zero additional electrical load, then climate control at minimum fan speed. After 60 seconds, defroster activation if required. After 90 seconds, full electrical systems, normal. Heated seats only after the coolant temperature gauge has begun to rise. This 90-second stage protocol costs nothing. It requires no hardware, no modification, no expense. It removes between 25 and 35% of cold start mechanical load from the engine during its highest vulnerability window. The fleet operator in Nagoya has this protocol laminated to the sun visor of every vehicle. It is the first thing every new driver reads before their first shift. Habit number 1, the 30-second listening protocol. This is the habit the fleet operator in Nagoya credits more than any other single practice for the longevity of his fleet. And it is the habit that every Japanese mechanic I have ever spoken to practices personally without exception every morning with every vehicle they operate. After cold start, before any input, before any movement, before the radio, before the phone, the driver sits in complete silence for 30 seconds and listens. Not casually, actively, deliberately, with full attention on the acoustic signature of the starting engine. A healthy cold start has a specific sound profile. The initial combustion is slightly rough for the first 8 to 12 seconds as fuel trim adjusts and cylinders begin firing at consistent temperatures. The idle smooths progressively as oil pressure builds and hydraulic components receive lubrication. By 20 seconds, a healthy engine settles into a stable, consistent idle with no irregular sounds. Any deviation from that pattern is diagnostic data. A metallic tick that disappears before 10 seconds is normal oil pressure building through hydraulic lifters. A metallic tick that persists beyond 15 seconds indicates either low oil level, degraded oil viscosity, or a failing hydraulic lifter beginning its terminal wear cycle. Caught at this stage, the repair is a $200 lifter replacement. Ignored for 3 months, the repair is a $2,800 camshaft replacement. A whistle at cold start indicates either a vacuum leak that has opened as rubber hardened overnight, or a belt beginning to develop surface cracking. A rough idle that does not smooth by 20 seconds indicates a failing cold start enrichment sensor, a fouled injector, or an ignition component beginning to degrade. A knock at any point during cold start is the most serious signal in engine diagnostics. Low-speed cold knock indicates bearing wear entering its accelerating phase. Caught at the sound stage, the repair is a $400 bearing replacement. Ignored for 6 months, the repair is a complete engine rebuild at $4,500 minimum. The fleet operator in Nagoya documents cold start sound observations in the same logbook as mileage and service records. Drivers are trained to categorize sounds using a 4-level classification system and to report any level 2 or above observation immediately. In 19 years of fleet operation, every engine-threatening condition caught early enough to prevent catastrophic failure was first identified during the 30-second listening protocol, not during a scheduled service inspection, not during a diagnostic scan. During 30 seconds of silence that cost nothing and required nothing except the decision to pay attention, your engine is telling you something every single morning. The only question is whether you are quiet enough to hear it. These 5 habits cost a combined total of $0. No products, no appointments, no services, just 5 decisions made before you back out of your driveway that change the entire wear trajectory of your engine from the first cold start you execute them on. The Japanese mechanic who trained the fleet operator in Nagoya told him something on his first day that I have never forgotten since he shared it with me. A cold engine is not a running engine. It is an engine becoming one. And every driver who treats those first 3 kilometers like the engine is already there is borrowing miles from the end of its life to spend at the beginning of their morning. You just stop borrowing. If this video changed how you think about the moment your key turns every morning, subscribe and share it right now. Every share puts this in front of someone still pulling out of the driveway before their oil pressure has finished building. Every subscription keeps this channel pulling out what the automotive industry assumed you would never look for. The next vault opens soon, and what is inside involves the Japanese fuel injector cleaning protocol that authorized mechanics across Japan perform at every 60,000 kilometer interval using a $3 compound that eliminates carbon deposits permanently, a procedure that Western service manuals replaced with a $400 dealership service built around a machine that does half the job for 20 times the price. If you own any direct injection Japanese engine built after 2005, you need to see that before your next service appointment.